You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. A warm welcome from Johannesburg in South Africa. I'm Eben, Jansen. The show broadcasts live every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. Highlights are repeated at 2 o'clock every afternoon with a rebroadcast at 5 a.m. the following morning. You can also watch us streaming live on YouTube between 9 and 10 a.m. every day with the entire show available on our YouTube channel all of the time. Now, the day Oscar's friends turned on him. That was the headline after a dramatic seventh day in court yesterday. Griselda will give us an update shortly. We'll also then look at the business of education in South Africa and alternative energy and why the question is not going away. But first, here are the news headlines. Parties have until this afternoon to submit their candidates' lists and pay a deposit to the Independent Electoral Commission to contest the May the 7th election. So far, the ANC, DA and COPE have submitted their lists. Yesterday, the EFF suffered a blow when the North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria dismissed its application for the 605,000 rand deposit to be set aside. The party has vowed to find the money to meet the deadline. Several drownings have been reported as persistent rain and flooding caused havoc in various parts of the country. In Mpumalanga alone, 11 people drowned while 12 were rescued. Vehicles were also swept away in floods. The South African Weather Service says flooding in the eastern parts of the country remains a risk due to high saturation caused by the rainfall. Rainy weather conditions are expected to clear up in the northeastern regions by Friday. Defence lawyer Barry Roux will continue to grill Darren Fresco in efforts to further paint him as an unreliable witness when the murder trial resumes in Pretoria this morning. Fresco, who is Oscar Pistorius' former friend, testified about the Paralympians' big love for firearms and about two incidents where Pistorius discharged a firearm in public. Pistorius is accused of murdering Riva Steenkamp on Valentine's Day last year. Darren Fresco, a friend of Oscar Pistorius, will continue testifying in the court this morning. Fresco was identified by two witnesses as being with the athlete on two occasions when a gun was fired in public. He told the court that the athlete was furious after a police officer touched his gun when he was stopped for speeding in 2012. Now, to get the latest on what's happening at court and what we can expect today, Griselda Lewis she's outside the court. No, we've lost the line with Griselda Lewis, unfortunately, so she's not there. She's not at court, and I think we'll go to... Okay. Griselda's back. Griselda, can you hear me? Good morning. Hi, Griselda. Good morning. Can you hear me? Are you there, Griselda Lewis? Well, unfortunately, Griselda's not there. We seem to have lost the line. The weather's really bad here in Johannesburg for the last 2 weeks, really, and it's quite difficult to get our links up and stabilize them. But we'll try and get Griselda back, if that's possible, a little bit later in the show. Now, Oscar's former friend, Darren Fresco, he's expected to face a grueling cross-examination by the defense when the trial resumes in Pretoria this morning. Defense lawyer Barry Roux will continue to grill Fresco in efforts to further paint him as an unreliable witness. Fresco testified about the Paralympians' love for guns. He's being questioned about two incidents where Pistorius discharged a firearm in public. The defense advocate posed questions to suggest that it was Fresco who was irresponsible with firearms and not his client. The Paralympian faces 3 counts of contravening the Firearms Control Act. He also faces a charge of murder for killing his model girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp. Earlier, pathologist Gert Simon claimed Steenkamp had a meal 2 hours before her death. This contradicts Pistorius' claims that they went to bed at 10 p.m. on the eve of Valentine's Day last year. Now it's week 2, and we are well into what some label the trial of the century. So far, interesting statements have been made and even more interesting questions raised about the complex society that we live in. We look back at some of the things that emerged in court last week and ask questions about how this court case has become more than just a murder trial, but also a mirror of South African society today. We are joined by Professor Sarah Nuttall, the Director of the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
In the first week, we heard some of the most memorable defenses yet, that Oscar screams like a girl. Up until now, we've been painted this picture of Oscar, the unstoppable man, the Blade Runner, the guy who has got guns and fast cars. What do you say to this defense, if I'm honest?
I think it was one of the most memorable lines, I must say, of any trial. And it takes us right to the heart of South African culture, because the idea of screaming like a woman is a bit like the idea of throwing like a girl. I think that South Africa would, a certain version of South African masculinity would take that as the ultimate insult to a certain version of heterosexual masculinity. So it was an unusual defense, but one that I think exposes to us the contradiction at the heart of this trial, which is about the contradictions of a sort of a hyper-masculinity on the one hand, and being willing to sacrifice that in order to defend yourself, as I think Oscar and his lawyers are trying to do, which is to make out that he screams like a woman, he throws like a girl.
We seem to be a very masculine society. Different sectors of society have very different ways of expressing that. Do we have a problem in the various sectors of a society, and in this case, white masculinity very much under the spotlight?
Oh yeah, I think we do. I mean, I think masculinity and apartheid went together in many respects, and I think that those particular tropes and ideas about masculinity sometimes cross race, but I think here on exhibition for us is a question around white masculinity. And I think that one of the really complex things at the heart of this trial is, on the one hand, this combination of the sort of bionic man that Oscar seemed to represent, and then the man who had no legs. And on the other hand, a guy who really loved guns and who has got himself into all sorts of trouble. So this idea of sort of a complex combination of potence and impotence, I think, is at the heart of the story. Yeah.
In South Africa, we've had some gruesome murders. We seem to almost be a little bit desensitized to these kinds of things. Anine Boysen, Inga Lotz, and Ina Burnett. And some of the reportage over the last week or so, or the last couple of days really, talks about the picture that's drawn around Reeva Steenkamp and that around somebody like Anine Boysen.
Yeah.
What are your views on that?
Well, I think that the degrees of hurt to women's bodies seem to be getting sort of ever worse. And there's a question right in there for cultural theorists like myself, which is there something about a certain version of male desire in this country, or again a version of hypermasculinity, which is invested in some way in hurting women's bodies to this degree. The description of Reeva's head the other day was very, very similar to the description of Inga Lotz's head and what happened to her. So the levels of violence against women seem to be ever more extreme.
When I read your article, you talk about something called gatedness.
Yeah.
Just explain, I think, to the viewer what you mean when you talk about gatedness and how this reflects in this trial.
Yeah, I mean, it's about this phenomenon of people living in gated communities. Yeah. And if you're as rich as Oscar is, you can live in a very, very secure gated community. And it seems so unlikely that you would need a loaded gun next to your bed when you live in such a secure complex. And statistically, Oscar was not at risk in many ways. It was most unlikely that a black man would have been found in his bathroom. He could have phoned security in 5 minutes. Yeah. So I think that there's this phenomenon that if you live in a gated community, you seem to live with more fear than people who live on the street with other people all the time.
Therefore, it comes back to the greatest of ironies, being the defense being he screams like a girl. Yeah,
absolutely. No, for sure. And the gun becomes a kind of prosthetic leg in some ways. Yeah. The loaded gun next to his bed. Yeah.
In South Africa, only 5% of households carry guns against crime, a statistic that's now rising to 6% here in Gauteng. Most crime does not take place in gated communities, but in the poorest communities in South Africa.
Well, that's exactly it. So why would Oscar have had to live in this way? It seems that, his tremendous fear of an intruder has a great deal to do with the history of white masculinity in this country, and very little to do with what the statistics tell us about who is likely to get killed in their homes in South Africa.
Another point you touched on in your article is about the judiciary moving from race to class. Yeah. Just tell us what you're thinking there.
Well, I mean, this is the argument that I think so many commentators are making, and you yourself making, around, is this a version of rich man's justice? And increasingly, I think what we're seeing is that in these court cases, people get to buy themselves out of murder in some ways. And the real reason for that, I think, is this move from confession to forensic evidence. And if the police team doesn't get the fingerprinting right, the forensics right, you can essentially get off a murder case. Yeah.
Well, very, very interesting comments indeed. Thank you for joining us this morning. That's Professor Sarah Nuttall, the Director of the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research here in Johannesburg. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Very, very interesting subject matter. But let's have a look at what you're talking about on social media, of course. There, Shatim Shadow says, unbelievable, worldwide the Oscar Pistorius trial is bigger in media than the 2014 World Cup. Margaret says, so sad about Oscar Pistorius. Guilty or not, his career is over. So much talent wasted. That is the story of this life, my dear. Wasted talent. Laurie P. Says, am I alone in thinking Oscar Pistorius took something to induce vomiting in an attempt to look distraught in court yesterday? Laurie P. leaving nothing out of the equation there, as it were. And then Cassie says, upon reflection this morning, I've decided the Oscar trial requires Judge Judy. That woman gets things moving and makes Roo look like a kitten. Fortunately, it's not as easy in the South African courts, Cassie. Well, it looks like we've fixed our lines and we can go back to the High Court where Griselda Lewis is standing by. Good morning, Griselda. Are you with us?
Good morning, Eben.
Griselda, just give us the quick broad strokes about what's been happening this morning and what can we expect?
Well, as usual, Eben, hordes of media still camped outside here, the North Gauteng High Court. Oscar Pistorius has already arrived here a bit early, I must say, and basically we're waiting for the court to get underway now at 9:30, where Darren Fresco, Oscar Pistorius' friend, will be cross-examined. You heard yesterday how he painted a picture of a trigger-happy Oscar Pistorius, somebody who has no regard for the rule of law. You'll know that Darren Fresco was there on 2 occasions when Oscar Pistorius fired a gun in public, and he refers to one incident where Oscar Pistorius fired through a sunroof and says when he asked Oscar Pistorius what he was doing, Oscar Pistorius basically just laughed at him, and he also spoke about another incident at the upmarket restaurant in Melrose Arc, where Oscar Pistorius discharged Darren Fresco's firearm underneath the table. So really what the state is trying to do here is to paint a picture of an Oscar Pistorius who none of us know. We know an Oscar Pistorius who is an Olympic athlete, somebody who has really gone on to put South Africa on the map, a different version, a different face of Oscar Pistorius really coming through in this trial. You'd know that Darren Fresco is the second character witness in this case. The first was Samantha Taylor, Oscar Pistorius' ex-girlfriend, who also painted a picture of a very violent Oscar Pistorius.
And today, Darren Fresco will continue on the stand this morning.
Well, that's right, Eben. We're expecting him to be grilled by the defense on basically, on his testimony, what he says about Oscar Pistorius. There were really questions yesterday from the defense as well about why Darren Fresco gave Oscar Pistorius his gun. And Darren Fresco basically, in trying to remove himself from the situation, saying that he gave Oscar Pistorius the weapon thinking that he was competent. He says that he'd previously been with Oscar Pistorius to the shooting range and really thought that giving Oscar Pistorius the gun would really mean no harm. But unfortunately, that gun did go off under that table.
Griselda, thank you for joining us this morning. I understand things are about to get underway and we came to you a little bit late, so thanks for that contribution. That's Griselda Lewis outside the North Gauteng High Court, where day 8 will start with Darren Fresco on the stand. Yesterday marked the 3rd anniversary of the quake tsunami disaster that swept away 18,000 victims, destroyed coastal communities and sparked a nuclear emergency. Do you remember waking up to this on that morning, the 11th of March in 2011? The Fukushima nuclear disaster thereafter rocked Japan. Hundreds of thousands were directly affected. It was a day when the world's nuclear industry finally woke up. You never thought about an earthquake that could create a tsunami that would swamp your emergency diesel generators and leave you without power for an extended period. You can watch that full story on our brand new Facebook page. Interact there with us if you've got stuff to put up, or if you want to see these kinds of interesting snippets, really, like our page, and you get lots of little snippets, weird and wonderful stories, and then also the news of the day or the news of the week, if that's what you like. Send us your photos or stories that you think are newsworthy, funny. We'll post your link on our wall and we'll look at it. Of course, you can still get us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. That's where we also interact with you. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we talk the business of education. Don't go away.
Respect isn't commanded, it's earned.
Good afternoon, you're watching the news at 1.
Now, one of South Africa's largest education departments has a new boss.
I will also motivate learners to love learning.
Yesterday, the lobby group lost yet another court bid to have the system halted.
Global wealth has risen by 68% over the past 10 years. That's according to a new Credit Suisse report. Well, it seems there's more gloomy forecasts in the foreseeable future for South Africa's economy.
We need to sort out this mess in the labour market.
That's News at 1, daily at 1 p.m. on SABC News.
Zoom into Africa. This is Ghana. The president is Mr. John Dramani Mahama. Ghana got independent from the United Kingdom on 6 March in 1957. The population is more than 25 million people. One of Ghana's major languages spoken is English. Monetary unit is cedi.
Welcome back. Education has the biggest slice of our annual budget. We spend more on educating a child in countries like Australia, yet there's a broad acknowledgement that basic education remains one of our nation's biggest challenges. The New Leaders Foundation is an organisation working to improve the quality of education through assisting teachers. They are currently providing training for more than 100 education officials who will graduate at the end of this month. Adelaide Fife and Gilles Gillette from the NLF joins us in studio this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Eben. Hi.
Thanks for joining us. Let's start with you, Adelaide. Just tell us about the program and the outcomes that you're seeing and that you're hoping to achieve.
So we've started working with government, and we've used the district as the key lever of change because it has a number of professionals, skilled and talented people, and motivated and passionate people.
Yeah.
So when we work with those people, they're able to service schools and support schools to really improve learner outcomes. And so that's where we work.
And when you look at this, just tell us, Jules, a little bit of more detail about the impact that you guys are seeing and that you're hoping to make on education in South Africa.
Sure. It's Giles. Eben, in terms of as Adelaide said, we've chosen to work in districts because for us they're the key lever of change.
Yeah.
Working with teachers, there are too many. And the district is government's platform for supporting schools. So it's a natural place to provide support. In terms of impact, there's been significant changes in the district's ability to shift their way of supporting schools. It's a very compliance-driven culture historically. And what we've seen is the districts moving from being compliance-driven to being more support and development-driven. So if you're sitting in a school and you're interacting with a district and you're seeing them as a kind of police force or monitoring and evaluating support, it doesn't work. And so we're trying to shift that paradigm.
The education police. Wow. Just tell us about benchmarking internationally. Where has this worked and who are we sort of going to follow if there is such a process?
We're going to follow the New Leaders Foundation. There are internationally a lot of people who work with districts, particularly the Americans, the UK, Australia, work with districts as a lever of change. But in terms of working systemically and really going in and partnering with the system to make all the chains in the system work, I think we're really going to set the benchmark internationally.
Charles?
Yes.
At a sort of provincial level, or how the province is going to roll this out, and what's the level of interest and interaction you're having at that level?
Well, because very little work even has been done with districts. There's been a lot of support from the civil society in schools. So the provinces are very excited. They've been trying to work the districts and support the districts. So having some innovation around district change and district transformation is something they're very interested in. So at the moment, we've worked mostly in Gauteng. We're speaking through our partnership with the department, Free State and the Northern Cape, and it's about building the relationship, building the buy-in, coming up with the right funding model, and then rolling it out. So the interest and the willingness is definitely there. It's just a matter of bringing the right partners together to make it work.
You've got a celebration coming up at the end of the month. Tell us about that, and how do you award those that perform?
So at the end of the month, we're having approximately 150 officials graduating from our program. And the program is having done our training course, plus having changed the way you work. So they have to provide a portfolio of evidence where they show how they've implemented this in their environment. So we're going to have a accreditation certificate for attendance, and then people who have done their portfolios of evidence with the University of the Free State will then get credits towards an honours and a master's in education.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. The New Leaders Foundation, Adelaide, Fife, and Giles, I thought it was French, actually.
It's all good, man.
Thanks, guys. Thank you for joining us. That's the New Year's, the New Leaders Foundation, telling us all about education and how things will be improving in the months and years to come. We hope so. Rising floodwater levels are causing havoc in eastern parts of the country, and in Mpumalanga, 11 people have drowned during the past week alone. Another 12 were rescued.
3 provinces at the mercy of unrelenting downpours. A man went missing after his car fell into this gaping hole in the road. Residents say this bridge has collapsed 3 times in 2 years. It's one of the 3 washed away by flood waters. Police divers are still searching for the man. In Johannesburg, around-the-clock repair work to damaged roads and worsening potholes. The old stormwater drainage system is exacerbating flooding. Over 100 Kliptown Soweto families were moved to a community centre after their shacks were flooded, and repeated warnings to people living along rivers. Meanwhile, many dams are filling rapidly, among them the Grootdraai, Vaal and Bloemhof. Residents living along the Vaal River have been urged to be cautious. An 8th sluice gate of the Vaal Dam could be opened if the water level keeps on rising. This could lead to flooding downstream. Police in Limpopo continue to search for a missing woman at the Klein Kariba resort outside Bella Bella. The woman and her husband were in an indoor swimming pool when floods swept through the reserve. The husband's body was recovered. Apparently a nearby dam caved in. Vehicles, buildings, roads, bridges and trees were all swept away. The rainy weather is expected to start clearing in the northeastern regions by Friday. Nozintombi Mia, SABC News.
Now, alternative energy sources has come into the spotlight once again after electricity supplier Eskom last week resorted to load shedding Eskom said a wet supply of coal caused them to put the country on a load shedding schedule, with rainy weather still being a risk for more wet coal and the winter months around the corner. Electricity supply might be strained again, or will be strained again. In our studio today, we are joined by Professor Raymond Parsons from the Potchefstroom Business School and a special policy advisor to the Business Unity of South Africa. Good morning, sir, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
You've been looking at alternatives to save the country from these kinds of marginal situations, I understand, like we had last week. What do you think can help the electricity supplier in what seems like a bit of a fix?
Well, I think the point of departure for us must be that we're in a situation now where trying to keep the lights on is too important to be left only to an organization like Eskom, as important as it is. So clearly, we need to have a collaborative effort, look at other alternatives. For many South Africans, it's like watching a bad old movie from January 2008.
Yeah.
And it's not a good message to send out. We should have learned a lot more about how to deal with the situation, bearing in mind that our economy was booming then.
Yeah.
So one could almost understand the problem even if one didn't accept it.
Yeah.
Now we're struggling to grow at 2 or 3%, and we're having this problem. So clearly we've got to now rigorously and seriously look at lessening our dependence on Eskom by levelling the playing field for the independent producers. That legislation is still in Parliament. There's the cogeneration opportunities. That is those companies and businesses that have their own electricity but can sell it into the grid. That's another option that we can look at. Of course, we must all try to save electricity as much as we can because that's part of the solution. And then, of course, another point may be bearing in mind that there seems to be a 2 or 3 year gap between now, this is the critical situation, and when other capacity will kick in over 2 or 3 years. Another option which we could investigate could, of course, be the question of daylight saving.
Yeah.
And I think many South Africans should ask themselves, would they rather go through last Thursday again, or just get up 1 hour earlier, or stay up 1 hour later?
Yeah.
I understand we had it in the Second World War to save coal and for the war effort. We have it in Namibia, so perhaps we should investigate that as another option. But quite clearly, to bridge the gap between now and 2 or 3 years' time, we need to be able to say we're going to develop the other alternatives much more enthusiastically than we've been able to do up until now.
Why is there seemingly, and this is probably a perception from just scanning around the media myself, we don't have a real appetite to invest in alternative energy sources as we should have?
Well, you do need a policy framework, and I think we've not been speeding up the framework or the environment within which the independent producers can really pull their weight, step up to the plate.
Yeah.
Also the cogeneration. And the issue also is that now one feels that Eskom has outgrown its monopoly. It needs more competition.
Yeah.
And that's what this represents. We need to encourage that competition. I mean, just to be serious for a moment, but also light-hearted, what other company goes on television every night and says, please buy less of my product? And if you were to use a business analogy, if you had a car manufacturer who got up and said, please buy less of my cars, I'm going to charge you more for it. If you buy more of it, I'm going to penalize you. And if you do get a car, please don't drive it too much. They would be out of business in a week. So we have to look at the competitive environment. Yes, of course, Eskom will still be a major player, but we've now got to move on structurally and have a more competitive market which will encourage these alternatives, incentivize them so that we can spread our risks better on the energy front and that we're less dependent on a monopoly that quite clearly can no longer manage the total situation.
Finally, sir, where's the money going to come from?
Well, I think the big issue here, we mustn't see it as just a money problem. There's a management problem.
Yeah.
That's the message we've got to send out of, indeed, confidence that as a nation, with government, Eskom and business and the consumer, that we are going to tackle these problems by manage them both top-down and indeed bottom-up in a more effective way. Don't see everything as a money problem, that if you throw enough money at a problem, it will be solved. That is not entirely the case here. It's got to be a management problem, and we've got to structure our electricity market in such a way that we concentrate the minds of those who have to manage it better than they have managed it up until now.
Just quickly, do you expect a very cold, dark winter?
Well, a lot depends on the outcome of certain discussions which are now taking place. It's going to be a very tight situation. I think we must understand that it will call for the cooperation of everyone to get through this winter and keep the lights on.
Well, thank you for joining us with those wonderful insights, Professor Raymond Parsons from the Potchefstroom Business School. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's take a quick look at what you are talking about on social media. It's been an Oscar pretty much for the last couple of weeks. Now it seems to be a bit of weather getting under our skin. So if it rained non-stop for 2 months, we'd have no roads in South Africa, because after a couple of days, rain roads are just patches of tar. That's from Njaro. Comment hater. And in other mathematical news, the Vaal Dam is 107% full. Yeah, that's a fair question, I suppose. Alicia says, I think we've had enough rain, dam breaking walls, roads falling apart, people contemplating suicide. Oh, it's just you. We hope that it's only just you, my dear. You shouldn't be contemplating suicide, mind you. You know, rain is a blessing in Africa. SABC News, that's where you can send your comments at SABC Newsroom. Of course, Newsroom is our Facebook page where you can put up your videos, put up your photos. We'll broadcast the video if it's good. After the break, we'll go to the capital for the Oscar Pistorius trial, day 8.
Across the globe, the continent and the entire country, every second there's always a breaking story. SABC News is your reliable eye, ear and information system in bringing you events as they happen. Our cutting-edge and hard-hitting journalism leaves no stone unturned, giving you the whole picture every time. Join us every day on SABC2 and know what is happening around you. SABC News, Africa's news leader.